The little girl hit the ground before anyone caught her. 8 years old, maybe less. Face down in the red dust of a Texas summer, one arm stretched backward like she was trying to hold something, and she was. Her fingers were locked around the wrist of a child, even smaller, a tiny girl with hollow cheeks and glassy eyes, who swayed on her feet, too weak to fall. The merchant's boot was already drawing back. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the end. Drop your city in the comments. Let us know how far this story has traveled. Garrett Cole's hands were covered in axle grease when he heard the commotion. He didn't look up right away. 14 years of working a ranch outside Dusty Fork, Texas, had taught him that most commotion wasn't his business. Men argued over prices. Women argued over thread. Kids knocked things over. You learned to let the noise pass through you like wind through fence slats. But this sound was different. He straightened up from the wagon wheel, wiped his hands on the rag tucked through his belt, and turned toward the market square. The summer of 1878 had burned Dusty Fork down to its bones. 3 months without rain. The creek had gone to mud in June and stopped moving altogether by the first week of July. Cattle were dying on ranches across the county, and the ones that weren't dying were thin enough to count ribs from 20 feet away. Every person in this square was short on patience and shorter on mercy. Garrett saw the girl on the ground first. She'd fallen just in front of Clay Holt's supply stall, the biggest stall at the Saturday market, loaded with flour, salted pork, dried beans, water jugs, sweating in the heat. Garrett didn't know her, didn't recognize the threadbare gray dress or the mud-stiffened braid hanging across her shoulder. She was maybe 11, 12 at most. Hard to say. Hunger did things to a child's face that aged them in the wrong direction. She wasn't unconscious. Her head was up. One hand was pressed flat against the cracked earth, and the other was wrapped around the wrist of the smallest child Garrett had seen standing upright in recent memory. The little one couldn't have been more than 5. She had the same dark hair, the same gray dress, but her eyes were what stopped Garrett cold. They were fixed on Clay Holt with the blank, absolute emptiness of a child who had already used up all her fear and had nothing left behind it. Clay Holt was a big man, heavy-set, red in the face from the heat and from whatever private outrage was fueling him right now. He had a water jug in one hand. He looked down at the girl on the ground the way a man looks at a dog that has gotten under his feet. "I told you to move on," he said. His voice carried across the whole square. People nearby had stopped walking, stopped talking. Garrett could see them all doing the same calculation. This ain't my business. This ain't my problem. Just keep moving. "We didn't take anything." The older girl's voice came out steady, despite the fact that her arms were shaking. "I was just asking if you had work we could do for some water. Just water. I don't have work for strays." Clay set the jug back on the shelf. "Now get out of my stall before I have you removed." "Please." The word came out quieter. Garrett had to strain to hear it. "My sister hasn't had water since yesterday morning. It's 100 degrees out here. If you can't pay us, I'll take it as charity and I'll owe you. I'll remember and I'll pay you back someday, I swear it." "You'll pay me back." Clay repeated it like she'd said something genuinely amusing. "Girl, you ain't got a cent to your name. You ain't got shoes. You're sitting in my dirt telling me you'll owe me." He shook his head. "Move. Last time I'm saying it. Please." "I said move." His boot drew back. Garrett was already walking. He didn't make a decision about it. His legs made the decision. His body had already covered 15 feet of ground before his mind caught up with what he was doing. And by then, he was standing between Clay Holt's boot and the girl on the ground, and Clay was looking up at him with the startled expression of a man who had not expected an obstacle. "Hold on," Garrett said. Clay's expression shifted from startled to annoyed. "Cole, stay out of this." "How much does she owe you?" Clay blinked. "What?" "The water. How much?" "She don't owe me. She ain't bought anything. I'm telling her to leave." Garrett reached into his coat pocket, pulled out 2 coins, set them on Clay's counter without looking at the man. 2 bits. That covers a jug of water and whatever food scraps you got that you were going to throw out anyway. He looked down at the older girl. "Get up, miss. Nobody's going to hurt you." She didn't move right away. She looked at him the way you look at a trap before you step on it, long, careful measuring the distance from the teeth to the spring. Her eyes were dark, older than her face. There was intelligence in them. The kind that came from learning very early that adults lied with their voices and told truth with their hands. "I don't know you," she said. "Name's Garrett Cole. I got a ranch about 4 miles out." He crouched down to her level. "I'm not going to hurt you or your sister, but I need you to stand up so I can get you both some water before the little one falls over." The small girl's hand tightened on her sister's wrist. She hadn't made a sound through any of this. Hadn't cried. Hadn't begged. She just stood there, holding on, her eyes moving between Clay Holt and Garrett, like she was tracking the most dangerous thing in her field of vision, and hadn't decided yet which one it was. "Come on, Della." The little girl's voice was barely a whisper, barely anything at all, just sound shaped into 2 syllables. The older girl, Della, looked at her sister, then back at Garrett. Something shifted in her face. Not trust, not yet, but something close to it. The calculation that said this particular risk might be worth taking. She stood up. Her legs were unsteady. Garrett put a hand out 1 finger of distance from her elbow, not touching, just offering. She found her balance on her own, squared her shoulders, lifted her chin. Whatever was happening inside her, she was not going to let it show on her face. "Thank you," she said. The words came out flat, not warm, not grateful, just accurate. "Don't mention it." Garrett straightened up, looked at Clay. The jug. Clay's jaw was tight. He wasn't happy. Garrett had been doing business with this man for 12 years, and he knew what that looked like on his face. The muscle working in his cheek, the slight flare at the nose. But 2 bits was 2 bits, and Clay Holt had never in his life turned away money. He set a jug on the counter. Garrett picked it up, handed it to Della. She took it with both hands, unscrewed the top, and gave it immediately to the smaller girl without drinking herself. The little one drank. Long, desperate pulls, water running down her chin and darkening the collar of her dress. She drank until Della gently pulled the jug back. "Slow," Della said quietly. "You'll be sick." The little girl's eyes closed, just for a moment, relief moving through her like a wave. Garrett watched. Something moved through his own chest that he didn't have a clean name for. He thought about Eli, his son, 10 years old, who was right now sitting in the shade of the livery stable, waiting for his father to finish loading supplies. He thought about what it would mean to have Eli standing in this dust, in this heat, dependent on the charity of strangers. The thought was almost physically painful. "What are your names?" he asked. Della looked at him sideways. "Why? Conversation." "Conversation don't require names." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." He waited. Another long pause. The little girl opened her eyes and looked at Garrett. She had gray eyes, pale and clear as creek water in November. She looked at him for a long moment without expression, then she looked at her sister. "I'm Della," the older girl said finally. She put her hand on the little one's shoulder. "This is Pearl. How long have you been in Dusty Fork?" Della's chin went up. It was a small movement, but he caught it. The reflex of someone who'd answered this question before and didn't like where it led. "Long enough." "Where you staying?" "Around." Around meaning nowhere. She didn't answer, which was an answer. Garrett looked at the 2 of them, the calloused bare feet, the dresses that were thin enough to read through in the right light, the hollowness under Della's cheekbones that said she'd been giving her share of whatever food they had to Pearl for longer than a day. He looked at Pearl's eyes again. That blank, bottomless quiet. The kind of quiet that went deeper than exhaustion. "Where are your folks?" he asked. "Dead." Della said it like she was reporting the weather. Flat. Final. Her hand moved to Pearl's shoulder and stayed there. "Family." "No." "How long have you been alone?" For the first time, something crossed Della's face that wasn't controlled. A flicker, there and gone. "Long enough," she said again. From behind Garrett came footsteps. Light quick the sound of a 10-year-old boy who was constitutionally incapable of walking slowly when he was curious about something. Pa. Eli appeared at his elbow. He looked at Della, then at Pearl, then back at his father, then back at Pearl again, taking in the full picture with the blunt honesty of a child who doesn't know how to pretend he hasn't noticed something. Are they okay? They're working on it, Garrett said. Eli looked at Pearl. Pearl looked at Eli. Pearl's hand was still locked around Della's wrist. Eli studied her for a moment, her stillness, the way she held herself. Something careful in his young face. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a piece of dried apple he'd bought from the candy stall 40 minutes ago and had been saving. He held it out toward Pearl, no words, just the offering. Pearl didn't move. Go ahead, Eli said. I ain't hungry. It was an obvious lie. He'd been complaining about being hungry for the last hour. Della saw the lie too. Garrett watched her see. It watched something shift at the corners of her eyes that might have been the beginning of something dangerous, the beginning of believing that kindness was real. She killed it fast. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Garrett. What do you want? She asked directly. Nobody does nothing for free. What do you want from us? Garrett held her gaze. Nothing. That ain't possible. It is if I say it is. Men don't buy water for strangers and ask for nothing. I didn't buy it for a stranger, Garrett said. I bought it because that little girl was going to fall down in the heat and nobody else was moving. He kept his voice even. And because somebody should have helped you before today, and I'm sorry they didn't. Della's jaw worked. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at the jug measuring calculating. Looking for the trick, the price underneath the offer. He waited, and he let her look as long as she needed to, because pushing her wasn't going to get either of them anywhere. You got food? She asked finally. Her voice had shifted. Still guarded, but something underneath it had cracked open just slightly. Not for me, for Pearl. She ain't eaten since 2 days ago, and I don't know if she can keep walking much longer. Garrett looked at Pearl. The little girl was leaning slightly into Della's side, one hand still holding the jug, one hand still on her sister's wrist. Her eyes were half closed against the sun. I got food, he said. Where? Back at the ranch, 4 miles out. Della's eyes narrowed. You want us to get in a wagon with a stranger and ride 4 miles out of town? I want you to get somewhere cool and sit down before your sister collapses. He looked at Della straight. I know how that sounds. I know you got no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to try anyway. Last man who said that locked us in a barn. The words hit the air like stones dropped in still water. Garrett felt the impact of them, kept his face still. How long ago? He asked quietly. 8 months. Della's chin came up, defiant, daring him to ask more. Henderson Ranch 2 counties over. Said we was hired help. We wasn't. We ran. Her eyes were steady on his face. I'll run again. I want you to know that. I don't care how big you are or how far it is. If you try anything, I'll take Pearl and I'll run, and you won't catch us. I believe you, Garrett said. And I won't try anything. Pearl turned her head and looked up at her sister. She didn't say anything. She reached up and touched Della's hand where it rested on her shoulder. Della looked down at her. Something passed between them that was older than either of them, a language built from 2 years of surviving together. Then Della looked back at Garrett. Your boy comes too, she said. I want him where I can see him. Fair enough. And if anything feels wrong, I'm leaving. That's your right. I mean it. I know you do. Another silence. The market moved around them, people and noise and the punishing weight of the Texas sun. Clay Holt had already turned back to his other customers, already moved on. Nobody in this square would remember this in an hour. That was how it worked. Della reached down and took Pearl's hand, full and deliberate, lacing their fingers together. All right, she said. All right. She said it like someone stepping off a ledge. Like someone who had stopped expecting the landing to be soft, but was jumping anyway. Garrett led them to the wagon. Eli walked beside Pearl without being told to, matching her pace, which was slow. Pearl walked with her eyes down, watching the ground, each step careful and deliberate. She hadn't let go of Della's hand. Garrett helped Della up first. She took the assist with stiff shoulders, like she needed to prove she didn't need it, then settled Pearl in next to her in the wagon bed, pulling her sister close against her side. Eli climbed up beside his father on the bench. "Pa," Eli said quietly as Garrett took the reins. "They're going to stay for supper, right?" "Yeah, son." "And after supper?" Garrett didn't answer right away. He looked out at the road, at the red dust rising ahead of them, in the heat, at the flat Texas sky burning white at the horizon. He heard Pearl shift behind him, heard Della murmur something low and quiet to her sister, heard the whispered response that was so small it barely registered as sound. "We'll figure it out," he said. Eli looked at him. That steady, measuring look that Ellen had given him too before she died. Her eyes in their boy's face. "Ma would have wanted us to help," Eli said. Not pushing, just stating a fact. Garrett's hands tightened on the reins. "She would have," he said. "So we help." "So we help." The ranch sat low against the hillside cedarwood and old stone. The summer had burned the yard grass down to nothing left. The ground hard and pale, but the house held its shade. The live oak that Ellen had planted the year they arrived was big enough now to cover half the front porch in shadow, and the water barrel under the eave was full from the last tank delivery. Della climbed down from the wagon before Garrett offered a hand. She stood in the yard with Pearl at her side, both of them looking at the house with the same expression, taking in exits, distance to the road, everything at once. "Come inside," Garrett said. "Get out of the sun." Della didn't move immediately. She looked at the house, looked at Garrett, looked at Eli. "There's beef stew from this morning," Garrett said. "And cornbread, and I'll pump fresh water from the well." Pearl made a sound. Very small. Not a word, just a sound. She leaned slightly forward, barely perceptible, like something in her body had responded before she could stop it. Della put her hand on Pearl's back. Her eyes were still on Garrett. "You cook it yourself?" "Yep." "You live alone?" "Me and my boy." "No wife?" Garrett's jaw tightened. Just slightly. "No, not anymore. 2 years." Della looked at him. The wariness in her face shifted by a fraction, not trust but recognition. She knew that particular flavor of grief. It was in her own eyes every time she thought she wasn't being watched. "Okay," she said. "We'll come inside." The kitchen was cool after the heat outside. Della stood with Pearl in the center of the room, both of them rigid, both of them ready to move. Garrett went straight to the stove, didn't make a show of it, just started reheating the stew and slicing cornbread and moving around his own kitchen like two strangers standing in the middle of it, was the most ordinary thing in the world. Eli pulled 2 chairs up to the table, sat down in one himself, left the others. "You want to sit down?" he asked Pearl directly. "It's okay. The chair don't bite." Pearl looked at the chair, looked at Eli. Her mouth moved but no sound came out. "She don't talk much," Della said from beside her. She said it matter of fact, not apologizing for it, not explaining it. Just information. "That's all right," Eli said easily. "I talk enough for 2 people anyway. Pa says it's a problem." He looked at his father. "Don't you say that, Pa, every single day," Garrett said from the stove. Something happened in Della's face. It lasted less than a second. The beginning of a smile killed before it reached her eyes. But it had been there. She sat down. She pulled Pearl's chair close to hers and helped her sister settle into it. Then she sat with her spine straight and her hands flat on the table and her eyes on the door. Garrett set bowls in front of them. Della looked at the bowl, then at him. "What's the price?" "There ain't one." "There's always one." Garrett put a spoon beside the bowl, did the same for Pearl, and straightened up. "Della, listen to me. I'm a rancher. I'm a father. I wear one ring on my finger, and it belonged to my wife who's been in the ground 2 years, and I haven't taken it off because some habits outlast grief. He looked at her straight. I don't want anything from you. I just saw two children who needed help, and I'm in a position to help them. That's all. Della looked at his hand, the ring. She studied it for a moment, then she picked up her spoon. She ate 2 bites before she stopped herself, turned to Pearl and started helping her sister eat first, guiding the spoon patient, steady making sure Pearl got every mouthful before she took another herself. Garrett saw it. Didn't say anything. Just quietly refilled the bowls when they went empty, once, twice, until Della finally leaned back from the table, her small stomach unable to hold more, and the tension in her shoulders had dropped 2 degrees from where it had been. Pearl's eyes were drooping. She'd eaten without hurrying, without fear, in the methodical way of a child whose body understood it was getting what it needed, even if her mind hadn't caught up yet. Her grip on Della's hand hadn't loosened once through the entire meal. There's a room, Garrett said. Off the kitchen. It was the storage room. I cleared it out after Ellen died. He kept his voice even. Got a cot in there. You can both sleep. Stay tonight at least. It's too hot to travel, and I won't put you back out on that road in this heat. Della's eyes came up sharp. Where will you sleep? I got a room. Your boy. His room's upstairs. And you won't come in. Not without knocking first. Not without permission. Della looked at him for a long moment. The same weighing, measuring look she'd been giving him since the market. Looking for the lie. He held still and let her look. If you do, she said, her voice dropping low and quiet and absolutely steady. I'll kill you. I don't care how big you are. I'll find a way. She meant it. There wasn't a gram of performance in it. Garrett had spent 12 years as a deputy before he gave up the badge. He knew when people meant what they said. I know you would, he said quietly. And I believe you could, but you won't have to. Della held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she looked at Pearl, who had fallen asleep in her chair, her head tipped to the side, one hand still loosely holding Della's wrist. She hasn't slept safe in 8 months, Della said. Her voice cracked on the last word just barely. She pressed her lips together. I need her to sleep safe. She will hear, Garrett said. Both of you. The silence stretched between them. Outside the window, the Texas heat bore down hard and white and relentless. Inside the kitchen was quiet enough to hear Pearl breathing. Why are you doing this? Della asked. The real reason, not the short answer. Garrett was quiet for a moment. He thought about Ellen. He thought about Eli. He thought about all the years he'd spent chasing other people's problems on behalf of a badge and a territory, and the one morning he'd come home too late. He thought about what it meant to stand in front of something wrong and move instead of calculating whether moving was his business. Because a long time ago, he said, I made a choice to ride toward trouble instead of away from it. I got out of the habit for a while. Maybe I needed reminding. Della looked at him. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find the lie this time. Okay, she said quietly. She stood up, lifted Pearl easily, her sister's head falling against her shoulder, and she walked toward the storage room without another word. At the door she stopped. Garrett? She didn't turn around. Yeah, thank you. It came out rough, like the words had to get past something stubborn to reach the air. For the water, for this, for not. She stopped. For not being what you expected, Garrett said. A pause. Yeah, she said. For that. She went through the door. He heard the scrape of the cot, the small sounds of settling, and then quiet. Eli appeared at his father's elbow. He was looking at the closed door with an expression Garrett recognized. It was the same look the boy got when he found a wounded animal and was already calculating how to feed it. Pa, Eli said. They're staying. Right. Garrett looked at this closed door. He thought about the ring on his finger, about the 2 years of moving through his own life like a man walking through water. He thought about Della's eyes. He thought about Pearl's hand locked around her sister's wrist, even in sleep, even after everything. Yeah, he said. They're staying. Good. Eli nodded, satisfied, already heading for the stairs. Ma would say the same thing. You know she would. Garrett didn't answer. He stood alone in the kitchen with the last light of the afternoon cutting through the window and the dust of dusty forks settling on everything outside. He looked at the door behind which two small girls were sleeping for the first time in months without fear. He'd taken them in for a night. Just one night. But already standing in the quiet of his own kitchen, Garrett Cole knew the truth that he wasn't quite ready to say out loud. One night was never going to be enough. Not for them. Not for Eli. Not for him. He turned back to the stove, started cleaning up, and let himself just for a moment feel something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Something that felt uncomfortably close to hope. Garrett woke before dawn the way he always did, by habit, more than intention, his body trained to the rhythm of ranch work before his mind had fully come back to itself. He lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the house. Quiet. Then a sound. Movement in the storage room. Careful, deliberate movement, the kind a person made when they were trying not to be heard. A soft footfall. A pause. Another footfall. He tracked it through the wall toward the kitchen, and then he heard the unmistakable sound of someone checking the front door, testing the latch. Not opening, it just confirming it was there and that it opened. He closed his eyes. She was mapping the exits. In the middle of the night, in a house she'd been in for less than 8 hours, Della was mapping every way out. 11 years old, and she hadn't slept through a night in God knew how long, because sleeping through the night meant trusting that the danger wasn't coming, and she had learned the hard way, and more than once, that the danger always came. Garrett stayed in his room. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He lay in the dark and listened to her move through the kitchen and back to the storage room door, and he did not pretend that what he was feeling was anything other than fury. Not at her, not even close to her, but at every person and every circumstance that had made her this way. At a world that handed a child that much fear and called it survival. When the sounds stopped and the house went quiet again, he stared at the ceiling for a long time before sleep came back for him. Morning arrived loud. Eli arrived louder. Garrett heard his son's feet on the stairs before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. Heard the boy hit the kitchen floor and stop. Heard the deliberate quiet that followed, which meant Eli had remembered the girls and was attempting in his own imperfect way to be considerate. Garrett, dressed, came out to find his son standing in the middle of the kitchen with both hands in his pockets, staring at the storage room door with an expression of concentrated patience that looked exactly like his mother. "They still sleeping?" Eli asked without turning around. "Probably. Pearl looked real tired yesterday." She was. Eli turned. "Pa, how long are they going to stay?" Garrett moved to the stove, started the fire for coffee. "Haven't figured that out yet. But they're not leaving today." "No." Eli accepted this with a single nod, the way he accepted most things quickly, practically already moving on to the next problem. "I'll do the morning feed so you can stay close to the house, in case they need something." Garrett looked at his son. 10 years old. Ellen's eyes and Ellen's instincts, and not a selfish bone in his body that Garrett had ever been able to find. "That's good thinking, son." Eli grabbed his hat off the peg by the door and went out. Garrett started coffee and sliced bread and put a pan on for eggs. He worked quietly, and about 20 minutes later, he heard the storage room door open. Della came out first. Her hair was loose, unpinned, hanging dark and tangled around her face. She'd slept in her dress. She was barefoot, which made her look younger than she had yesterday, and she was carrying her boots in one hand, which told him she'd grab them first thing before anything else in case she needed to move fast. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him with those measuring eyes. "Morning," Garrett said. "Morning." She looked around the kitchen. "Where's your boy?" "Doing the morning feed. He'll be back in 20 minutes. She nodded. Looked at the stove. "That's for us. For all of us." She set her boots down by the door, close to the door. Garrett noticed not across the room and walked to the table and sat down in the same chair she'd used the night before. She pulled one knee up to her chest and sat with her chin resting on it, watching him cook with the focused attention of someone cataloging information. "Pearl's still sleeping," she said. "Good." She doesn't usually sleep past first light. She hasn't in months. A pause. I think maybe she feels... Della stopped. Started again. I don't know what she feels. She doesn't say much. Garrett kept his attention on the eggs. How long has she been quiet like that? Since our parents died. About 2 years. Della's voice was even. She used to talk all the time. Wouldn't shut up honestly. Talked about everything. Asked 100 questions a day. She looked out the window. Then Mama and Papa were gone, and Pearl just stopped. Like she decided the world didn't deserve her words anymore. The sentence landed in the kitchen and sat there. Maybe she was right, Garrett said quietly. Della looked at him. Something shifted in her face that wasn't quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. Like she hadn't expected him to agree with that. Maybe, she said. He put eggs on 2 plates, added bread, brought them to the table. He went back for his own plate, and coffee sat down across from her. Della waited until he'd picked up his fork before she touched her old habit. And when she ate, it was with more control than the night before, still hungry, but not desperate, her body starting to believe the food was real and would keep coming. They ate in silence for a few minutes. You gonna ask about the Hendersons? Della said without looking up. Only if you want to tell me. I don't. Not today. Then we don't talk about it today. She did look up then, brief, then back down. Most adults push. They say they want to help, and then they push to get the whole story, and you can tell that what they really want is the details, the bad parts. Her jaw tightened. So they can feel something, or so they can decide how much sympathy we deserve. I'm not most adults. You keep saying things like that. I keep meaning them. She ate another bite, chewed, swallowed, then quietly not looking at him. I was 12 when they died. Mama first, then Papa 6 weeks later. Papa said he died of grief. The doctor said it was his heart. Might have been both. A pause. Pearl was 4. She doesn't remember much. Mostly she remembers that they were there, and then they weren't. Garrett held still, didn't speak, didn't fill the space with sympathy she hadn't asked for. The county sent us to the Hendersons 4 months later, Della continued. Judge Voss arranged it. He arranges most of the orphan placements in this territory. He got paid for every child he placed, that's what I heard the Hendersons say. $50 a head. Her voice had gone flat and factual. The Hendersons said we was family. Said we had a home. That lasted about 2 months before they started working us from sunup to dark and stopped bothering to feed us regular. She put her fork down. When I asked about school, Mrs. Henderson laughed. When Pearl got a fever and I asked for the doctor, Henderson said we weren't worth the bill. Garrett's hand on his coffee cup was very still. So we ran, Della said. Took Pearl in the middle of the night. Walked 14 miles to the next town. Judge Voss sent a man after us, said we were runaways, said we'd be returned. She looked up at Garrett directly. We hid for 3 weeks in a dry goods warehouse before we figured out they'd stopped looking. Then we walked south. We've been walking south for 5 months. She picked her fork back up and ate another bite like she hadn't just described 2 years of her life with the calm of someone reporting the weather. Garrett said, You walked from the Henderson Ranch to Dusty Fork. 200 miles, give or take. With Pearl. She's tougher than she looks. I don't doubt that. He set his coffee cup down. Della, I want you to know something. Whatever Judge Voss has on paper, whatever arrangement he made with the Hendersons, it doesn't make what they did to you legal. It makes them criminals. Della's eyes were steady. I know that. Doesn't change anything. It might. How? The word came out sharp. Not hopeful. Not even curious. Just a single syllable that meant, explain to me how anything you say is going to reach the people who have the power and the money and the law on their side. Garrett didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. The storage room door opened and Pearl appeared. She was still in her dress, her dark hair matted on one side from sleep, her gray eyes moving around the room until they found Della. The moment they landed, her whole body settled, shoulders dropping, the careful watchfulness easing just slightly. She crossed the kitchen to her sister's chair and pressed in close against her side without a word. "Morning, Pearl," Garrett said. Pearl looked at him. She blinked once slowly like a cat deciding whether to acknowledge you. Then she looked at the plate still waiting at her spot at the table. "You hungry?" Eli asked from the doorway. He'd come back in from the barn, without Garrett hearing him, still holding his hat in one hand. "Eggs are good. Pa makes them too dry, but they taste okay." Pearl looked at Eli. The corners of her mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. The shadow of one. She reached across the table for the fork and pulled her plate toward her. Eli sat down like it was the most natural thing in the world. That afternoon, Garrett went to town. He told himself it was for supplies. He needed flour, and he needed a new belt for the water pump, and he'd been meaning to go for a week. He didn't let himself think about the other reason until he was already hitching the wagon, and then he let it surface and looked at it plainly. He was going to find out what Judge Harlan Voss knew about two girls named Della and Pearl. Dusty Fork on a Monday was quieter than Saturday's market, but the heat was the same crushing physical, the kind that pushed down on your shoulders. He tied the wagon at the general store and went in for his flour. Edna Pratt was behind the counter. Edna Pratt was the kind of woman who knew everything about everyone in Dusty Fork approximately 12 hours before it happened. She was sharp-featured, sharp-eyed, and wore her hair pinned so tight it looked like it was pulling her opinions toward the front of her face. She looked at Garrett the way she looked at everyone, like she was already sorting through what she knew about him and deciding how much of it to use. "Mr. Cole?" Her smile was warm on the outside. "Haven't seen you in a couple weeks." "Been busy." "I heard." She set her hands flat on the counter. "People are saying you brought two girls home from the Saturday market. Orphans." Garrett looked at her evenly. "People talk fast. It's a small town." She tilted her head. "Are they staying on with you?" "For now. For now." She repeated it in that particular tone women like Edna used when they wanted you to know they'd heard the thing underneath what you'd actually said. "You know, Garrett, there are proper channels for that sort of situation. Judge Voss oversees all the orphan placements in the territory. If those girls were placed somewhere else before, and they've left that placement, they left because they were being worked like hired hands and underfed," Garrett said. His voice came out level. "Which you might know if you asked them instead of assuming Judge Voss's paperwork tells the whole story." Edna's mouth thinned. "I'm sure you believe that." "I'm sure they'd tell you themselves." "Children tell all sorts of things, Mr. Cole." Garrett put his money on the counter for the flour. "I'll need a 50-pound sack." Edna didn't move right away. She was studying him with those sharp eyes, calculating something, running numbers he couldn't see. "Judge Voss is a thorough man," she said finally. "He takes the welfare of orphaned children in this territory very seriously. If those girls are on his placement list and they've gone missing, he'll want to know where they are. Then he can come ask me directly. That's a very confident position for a widowed rancher with a 10-year-old boy. It's the only position I've got." She got his flour. He loaded it himself and drove out of town with the prickling certainty at the back of his neck that said the conversation wasn't over. It was just moving somewhere he couldn't see yet. He was right. He got home to find a man on his porch, not a ranch hand, not a neighbor. The man was too well dressed for either wearing a coat that cost more than Garrett's monthly expenses and sitting in the single porch chair with the relaxed authority of someone accustomed to being waited on. He had a round face, a trimmed gray beard, and eyes that were pale and small and didn't match his easy smile. Judge Harlan Voss stood up when Garrett's wagon came into the yard. "Mr. Cole?" His voice was generous, warm, the voice of a man who'd spent years practicing the sound of reasonableness. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I was in the area." Garrett climbed down from the wagon. He kept his movements unhurried. "Judge, I wanted to have a conversation about the two young ladies I understand you've taken in." Voss spread his hands in a gesture that said just a friendly visit, nothing to worry about. "As you may know, I oversee all orphan placements in this territory, and when children under my jurisdiction are relocated without proper authorization—" "They're not relocated," Garrett said. They're guests. Of course. The smile held. And generosity like yours speaks well of you, Mr. Cole. But there are legal frameworks I'm obligated to maintain. Those girls were placed by the county with the Henderson family. If they've left that placement, I need to verify their welfare and determine next steps. Their welfare? Garrett said it back without expression. Precisely. You want to verify the welfare of 2 children who walked 200 miles in the Texas summer to get away from the people you placed them with. A small pause. Voss's smile adjusted slightly the way a sail adjusts to a change in the wind. Children sometimes exaggerate difficult situations. The Hendersons are a reputable family. Whatever misunderstanding may have. I'd like you to leave my property, Garrett said. The smile didn't disappear, but something beneath it shifted. I understand this feels abrupt. I'm not here to cause trouble, Mr. Cole. I simply need to speak with the girls, assess the situation. You'll speak with them when I decide that's appropriate. Voss studied him for a moment. That pale-eyed measuring look that had nothing to do with friendliness and everything to do with the arithmetic of power. You're a widower with a young son, he said not unkindly. Raising 2 additional girls with documented difficulties no less, that's a significant undertaking. There are better suited arrangements. They've had your arrangements, Garrett said. They walked 200 miles to get away from them. Silence. The porch held still. The heat pressed down on everything. Somewhere behind the house, a horse stamped and the sound carried. Voss picked up his hat from the porch railing, turned it once in his hands. His smile had not entirely gone away, which was somehow worse than if it had. I'll need to formally assess the situation, he said. You understand it's my legal obligation. I'll be back within the week with the appropriate paperwork. He settled his hat on his head. I hope you'll be cooperative, Mr. Cole, for the children's sake. He rode out. Garrett stood in the yard and watched him go. He stood there until the hoofbeats faded, until the dust the man's horse had kicked up settled back onto the road, until there was nothing left of Harlan Voss in his yard, but the faint impression in the dirt where the man's horse had stood. Then he turned and went inside. Della was standing in the kitchen doorway. Her face was still, but her eyes were not. She'd heard every word. That was him, she said. Wasn't it? Garrett looked at her. Judge Voss. She said the name the way you said the name of something you'd been watching for over your shoulder for a long time. Not surprised. Almost relieved the way it felt when the thing you'd been dreading finally showed its face, and you could stop waiting for it. He's found us. Garrett crossed the kitchen, pulled out a chair, sat down at the table, and looked at the girl in the doorway. Come sit down, Della. She didn't sit. She crossed her arms over her chest. You should know something before you make any decisions. Her voice was careful and exact. Voss gets paid by the county for every child he places, and he gets paid again by the ranchers he places them with. The Hendersons paid him. There were others before the Hendersons. A family in Abilene that we stayed with for 6 weeks. She stopped, pressed her lips together. The point is, he has every reason to take us back, and he doesn't care where he puts us as long as someone pays him. Pearl appeared behind her sister. She'd been so quiet, neither of them had heard her cross the room. She put both arms around Della from behind her face pressed between Della's shoulder blades, and she held on. Della put her hands over Pearl's. Her jaw was tight, her eyes bright with something she was working hard not to let become tears. You're not going back, Garrett said. Della looked at him. You can't promise that. He's got the law. He's got a title. Garrett's voice was level. That ain't the same thing. And there are things about Judge Harlan Voss that I suspect nobody's bothered to look at very closely. I was a deputy for 14 years, Della. I know how men like him operate. Then you know they win, she said. Not always. He held her gaze. Not this time. Pearl's grip on her sister tightened. Della stood in the kitchen doorway holding her sister's hands, and for a moment she looked exactly her age, 12 years old, bone-tired, carrying weight that had never been hers to carry. And then she straightened up, and the expression on her face went back to what it always was. Steady, hard, ready. What do we do? she asked. Tonight, Garrett said, we eat supper, we sleep. Tomorrow we start figuring out what Voss doesn't want anyone to find. Della was quiet for a long moment. And if it's not enough? Garrett looked at Pearl, at her small hands wrapped around her sister's, at the way she pressed her face into Della's back, like the space between her sister's shoulder blades was the only safe place she'd ever found in the world. Then we find something else, he said. But we don't stop. Not for him. Not for any of them. It was the most he'd said at one time since they'd arrived. Della heard all of it, every word underneath the words. She studied his face one more time, that long, careful measuring look that was as much a part of her now as breathing. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Okay. He didn't sleep well that night either, but this time, it wasn't Della moving through the house that kept him awake. It was Voss's voice. That warm, reasonable, carefully constructed voice that said all the right things and meant none of them. Garrett had heard that voice before in courtrooms and jailhouses, in the offices of men who'd built careers out of looking legitimate while doing something else entirely underneath. He knew what it meant. It meant someone had learned that power didn't announce itself. It smiled. It shook hands. It expressed concern for the welfare of children while counting the money it made from moving them around like livestock. He was at his desk before dawn with a lamp and a piece of paper. He wrote down everything Della had told him. The placement sequence, the payments, the name of the family in Abilene before the Hendersons. He wrote down the number Della had mentioned, $50 a head, and he wrote beside it, county funds, private arrangement. Both. He wrote Voss's name at the top of the page and underlined it twice, and then sat back and looked at what he had. What he had was a 12-year-old girl's account of events she'd witnessed and experienced, which was everything and nothing. Everything because it was true, and nothing because truth without documentation was just a story. And a story told by an orphan girl against a territorial judge was the kind of story that didn't make it past the first room it was told in. He needed something else. He thought about Owen Marsh. Owen had been the junior deputy in Dusty Fork for 3 years. Young earnest, the kind of man who'd taken the badge because he actually believed in what it stood for. Garrett had mentored him briefly before turning in his own badge, and in the 2 years since Owen had kept doing the job with a straightforwardness that Garrett respected, even as he'd watched it make the boy's life more complicated than it needed to be. Dusty Fork was Voss's territory. Keeping your head down was easier than keeping your conscience clean. But Owen was the only man Garrett trusted with a badge on his chest. He folded the paper, put it in his coat pocket, and went to start breakfast. Della was already up. She was sitting at the table with her arms folded on the surface, and her forehead resting on her arms, not asleep, just still. She lifted her head when he came in, pushed her hair back, and looked at him with eyes that said she hadn't slept much either. "I've been thinking," she said. "So have I. The judge is going to come back with paperwork. He said within the week." She straightened up. "What kind of paperwork?" "Placement orders, most likely. Formal documentation that he has legal authority over you and Pearl and that you're required to return to county custody. And if he shows up with that, then we need to be further along than he is by the time he gets here." Della looked at him. "What does further along mean?" "It means I need to find something that proves what he's been doing before he can use the law to move you, before I can stop it." He went to the stove, started the fire. "I'm going to town today. I'm going to talk to someone I trust." "You trust someone in that town?" "One person. The deputy." Garrett looked at her. She'd seen Owen Marsh's office when she and Pearl had come through town, noticed things, filed them away. He shouldn't have been surprised. "Yeah, Owen Marsh." Della was quiet for a moment. "What if he's connected to Voss?" "He's not." "You sure?" "Sure enough." He put the pan on. "Della, I need you to tell me something. The family in Abilene before the Hendersons. What was their name?" She went still. "Greer. Edmund and Harriet Greer." "How long were you there?" 6 weeks. "What happened?" She looked at the table. Her thumb moved along the edge of it, back and forth, a small, unconscious motion. Edmund Greer had a lot of land and not enough hands to work it. He got Pearl doing laundry at 5 years old, in the heat, In July. A pause. I complained to Harriet. Harriet told Voss. Voss came and told us we were ungrateful, and that if we caused further problems we'd be placed somewhere less comfortable. She looked up. He said that. Less comfortable. Like where we were was comfortable. And then Edmund Greer tried to put his hands on me. Her voice went flat and factual, in the way Garrett had already learned meant she was getting through something by making it data instead of memory. I hit him with a fireplace poker, took Pearl, and we ran that night. Voss sent the county marshal after us that time. We hid in a root cellar for 4 days before they stopped looking. Garrett stood at the stove with his back to her, and kept his face forward and his hands still, and breathed through what he was feeling because losing his composure right now would help nobody. "Okay," he said when he trusted his voice. "That's enough. That's what I needed." Is it enough to do anything with? It might be. If the Greers are on Voss's placement list the same way the Hendersons are, and if I can find records of the payments. He turned around. I need to get into Voss's records. Della looked at him steadily. That sounds like something that could go badly for you. A lot of things could. You have a son. The words landed quietly, but they landed. Garrett looked at her across the kitchen, this 12-year-old girl who'd been taking care of a smaller child for 2 years on nothing but nerve and love, and who was now in the middle of her own crisis, thinking about what his risk would cost Eli. I know I do, he said. I'm just saying. She picked up her fork, looked at it. You don't have to do this. You already did more than most. You could give us some money and point us west and tell Voss we moved on before you could stop us. You wouldn't be lying. She set the fork down. Nobody would blame you. I'd blame me. She looked up. I'd blame me every day for the rest of my life, Garrett said. And so would Eli. And so would Ellen wherever she is. He put eggs on 2 plates. So let's not talk about that option anymore. Della was quiet for a long moment. Then, okay. Pearl appeared in the doorway behind her. She'd learned Eli's schedule, already knew he was outside doing the morning feed, and she'd started appearing in the kitchen at the same time each morning to watch Garrett cook. Not close. Not at the table yet, just present in the doorway, with her shoulder against the frame, and her gray eyes tracking the movement of pans and plates with a quiet attention that he found each morning a little easier to feel without his chest constricting. Morning, Pearl, he said. She blinked at him. Her mouth opened, slightly closed. She looked at Della. Morning, Della said for both of them the way she always did. But Pearl kept looking at Garrett, and after a moment so quietly, it was almost nothing, she said, Mornin'. Della's hand went still on the table. Garrett turned fully from the stove and looked at Pearl. The little girl was watching him with those pale, serious eyes, her shoulders still against the doorframe, one hand holding the fabric of her dress. Morning, Pearl, he said again, carefully, not making it large, not making it a moment she'd feel the need to run from, just answering. Pearl's chin moved down and up, the barest nod. Then she came to the table and sat down next to her sister, and Della put her hand over Pearl's hand, and neither of them said anything else. But when Garrett turned back to the stove, he had to stand there for a moment, doing nothing, because he didn't fully trust himself to move. He went to town after breakfast. He found Owen Marsh in the deputy's office going through papers with the focused discomfort of a man who'd been told to fill out forms he didn't entirely believe in. Owen looked up when the door opened, and his face went through a quick sequence: recognition, surprise, and then something more complicated. Garrett? He stood. Heard you had some company out at the ranch. Word travels. Edna Pratt's the fastest postal service in 3 counties. Owen came around the desk, lowered his voice. You know, Voss came by here yesterday. I figured. He wants those girls returned to county custody. Said he's got paperwork incoming from the territorial court. Owen's jaw was tight. Garrett, I don't like the man. I want to say that first. I've had a bad feeling about his operation since I got this badge, but a feeling isn't. I know. A feeling isn't evidence. Garrett reached into his coat and put the folded paper on Owen's desk. What if I told you I have the names of two families, the Hendersons and the Greers, both of whom received orphan placements from Voss, both of whom used those children as unpaid labor, and at least one of whom committed a criminal act against a minor in his care? Owen looked at the paper. He didn't touch it yet. I'd say that's a serious allegation. It is. Against a territorial judge. Yep. Owen looked at him. You got more than a 12-year-old's word? Not yet. That's why I'm here. Garrett sat down across from the desk. Voss keeps records. He has to, there's county money involved. Every placement gets documented. Every payment gets logged. If the amounts don't line up with the official county disbursements, that's a discrepancy. Somebody in the territorial office would be very interested in. Owen picked up the paper, now unfolded. It read through what Garrett had written. His face got quieter and tighter as he read. The Greer incident. He stopped. I know. Garrett, if Edmund Greer did what this says, he did. And Voss knew and covered it. That's what I believe happened. Owen set the paper down. He put both hands flat on his desk and stared at the wall and breathed for a moment. The county records are in Voss's office at the courthouse. He keeps his own set, two separate from the official ones, in a safe in his private office at his house. He stopped. Garrett waited. I've been in that house once, Owen said carefully. Last year. He had a dinner, invited the local officials, the kind of thing where he was establishing that everyone knew each other. He looked at Garrett. The private office is on the ground floor, east side of the house. You telling me something? I'm telling you about a dinner I went to. Owen held his gaze. I'm also telling you that I've got enough reason to formally request access to the county placement records at the courthouse tomorrow morning on administrative grounds, which would occupy Judge Voss's attention for most of the morning. A pause. On account of various procedural questions I've been meaning to raise for some time. Garrett looked at him. That's a considerable risk for you. These are children, Owen said flatly. So. They looked at each other. I'll need to go in at night, Garrett said. Tonight before he can move anything. I know. If something goes wrong, then you didn't get any information from me. You followed a lead on your own. Owen's voice was steady. But nothing's going to go wrong because you know what you're doing, and you're going in with a reason that matters. Garrett drove home and spent the afternoon working the ranch with the mechanical concentration of a man whose mind was somewhere else entirely. He split fence rails. He repaired the water pump. He moved through the work and let it hold him while he thought through every piece of what tonight would require. At supper, he was quiet. The children were not. Eli had apparently spent the afternoon teaching Pearl to play a card game he'd invented himself, the rules of which seemed to change whenever Eli was losing, which Pearl had apparently figured out quickly enough to exploit in her favor. She sat at the table with 3 cards fanned in her small hand, and looked at Eli across the table with an expression that on anyone else would have been called smug. She's cheating, Eli announced. She is not, Della said without looking up from her own cards. She keeps changing what beats what. You changed what beats what first. I watched you. That's different, because I invented the game. That's not how games work. It is if I say... Pearl placed her cards down on the table in a careful, deliberate fan. Whatever combination they represented, it was apparently decisive. She looked at Eli. The corner of her mouth moved. Eli stared at the cards. How did she... He looked at Della. Did you teach her that? She figured it out herself. Eli looked at Pearl with an expression that was trying to be aggrieved and kept sliding into admiration. Fine, he said. You win. This time. Pearl picked up the cards and squared them neatly and held them out to him to deal again. Garrett watched from the end of the table and felt something settle in his chest that was almost peace. It was temporary. He knew that tonight was still coming, but it was real, and he let himself have it for the length of one meal. After the children were in bed, he sat alone at the kitchen table with his lamp and went through it all one more time. Then he put on his coat, checked the knife at his belt, and blew out the lamp. He was at the door when he heard Della's voice. I know where you're going. He turned. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in the dark. She'd been waiting, he realized, for the sound of the lamp going out. "Go back to bed, Della." "You're going to his house." He didn't deny it. There was no point. "If he catches you," she said, "we lose everything. You know that." "I know." "Then why?" "Because if I don't go tonight, he comes back with paperwork in 3 days, and I don't have enough to stop him." He looked at her straight. "And I won't let that happen." Della stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and her jaw tight, and her eyes bright in a way he was learning meant she was working hard against something she didn't want to feel. "You just decided we matter," she said. "You don't even know us. You've known us 3 days. Sometimes 3 days is enough. That's—" She stopped, started again. "That's not sensible." "No," he agreed. "It's not." The silence between them held. Outside, the summer night pressed in thick and hot, the crickets loud enough to fill every space the darkness left empty. "Pearl talked this morning," Della said quietly. "You know that." "I know. She hasn't said anything to a stranger in 2 years." Her voice had gone rough at the edges. "She talked to you, and she's only known you 3 days, too." She looked at the floor. "So maybe 3 days is something." Garrett put his hand on the door. "Lock up behind me. Don't open it for anyone but Owen Marsh, and only if he identifies himself by name. And if you don't come back, I'll come back. But if you don't..." He thought about what she was really asking, what she needed to hear before she could let him go, because she had been let down by every adult who'd ever walked out a door, and she needed to know that if it happened again, it wasn't because he hadn't thought about her. "Eli knows where the cash box is," he said. "There's enough in it to get you and Pearl to San Antonio. Eli will take you if he has to. He knows his way around a horse, and he knows the road south." He met her eyes. "But that's a last case, Della. You understand I am coming back." She nodded. One small, contained motion. He opened the door. "Garrett." She said it the way she'd said it the night before. Not loud, not soft, just his name, like she was making sure he was real. He waited. "Don't get caught," she said. He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." He went out into the night. Voss's house sat at the north end of Dusty Fork, set back from the road behind a wrought iron fence that was meant to say something about the man's importance. Garrett had ridden past it 100 times without giving it more than a glance. Tonight, he gave it everything. He came in from the east side on foot, horse-tied a quarter-mile back in the mesquite. The house was dark, no lights on any floor. A dog somewhere nearby, but distant, not attached to this property. He moved along the fence line, found the gate on the east side that Owen had mentioned, and worked the latch with the slow patience of a man who'd done this before. The ground floor east window was unlatched. He stood outside it for 3 full seconds listening. Nothing. He went in. The office was exactly where Owen had said. He worked by feel, his hand trailing along the wall, until he found the desk, then moved behind it and crouched down, pulled out his small shielded lamp, and opened it to its narrowest beam. The safe was behind a framed map of the territory, not even a painting. Practical man. The combination Owen had told him about from memory, he hadn't dared write it down, was a date. He turned the dial. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock released. Inside, he found what he was looking for. Ledgers, 3 of them dense with columns of names and numbers. He opened the first one, ran his finger down the entries in the narrow beam of lamplight. His jaw tightened. Tightened further. He opened the second. The third. The entries went back 8 years. Name after name after name. Children. Placements. Payments. Amounts that did not match any official county record he'd ever seen in 14 years of working with the law. Private payments undocumented, running alongside the official county disbursements like a shadow accounting system for a shadow operation. He found Pearl and Della's names. He found the Greer entry. He found the Henderson entry. He found the notation next to it in Voss's own handwriting that said, "Returned difficult," and beside that, a figure that looked like a finder's fee for whoever brought them back. He was on his way to the window with the ledgers under his arm when the lamp in the hallway came on. Garrett went completely still. Footsteps. Slow, unhurried. The deliberate pace of someone who was not surprised, who had been waiting. The office door opened. Harlan Voss stood in the doorway with a lamp in one hand and a pistol in the other, and his warm, reasonable smile arranged carefully on his face. He looked at Garrett at the ledgers at the open safe, and his smile did not waver by a fraction. "Mr. Cole," he said pleasantly, "I wondered which night you'd choose." Garrett didn't move. He stood in the center of the office with the ledgers under his arm and his lamp in his hand, and he looked at Voss and did the only calculation that mattered right now, the distance between them, the angle of the pistol, and whether the man across from him was the kind who shot first or talked first. Voss was talking. That meant something. "Put the ledgers on the desk," Voss said. Still pleasant, still warm. The pistol held level and steady, the hand behind it entirely relaxed. This was not a man who was afraid of what he was doing. This was a man who had done this before. Garrett set the lamp down on the edge of the desk. He did not set the ledgers down. Voss's smile adjusted slightly. "Mr. Cole, the ledgers." "How long have you been running it?" Garrett asked. "I beg your pardon. The scheme. Children and money out. How long?" Voss regarded him with the patient tolerance of someone explaining arithmetic to a slow student. "You're holding private business records that you obtained by breaking into my home. That's not a conversation about schemes. That's a criminal act. Now I'll ask you one more time. Put the ledgers on the desk." "No." The word dropped into the room like a stone. Voss blinked, and for just a moment, beneath the pleasantness and the patience and the warm, reasonable voice, something else showed through. Something colder. "You're not a stupid man," Voss said. "So I'll be direct. You have no allies in this town that matter. You have no legal standing. You're a widowed rancher with a 10-year-old son, and you've broken into a territorial judge's private residence in the middle of the night. Whatever you think those ledgers say, whatever story you've constructed around two orphan girls who have a documented history of making false allegations against their placements." "Della hit Edmund Greer with a fireplace poker," Garrett said. "I imagine a man like you would document that as a false allegation. The part you left out was why she hit him." Voss was quiet for a moment. The pistol didn't waver. Children misinterpret adult behavior. It's a well-documented phenomenon. There's a 12-year-old girl in my house who walked 200 miles in the Texas summer with her 5-year-old sister because of the behavior she misinterpreted. Garrett's voice stayed level. "And there's a 5-year-old who didn't speak for 2 years. You want to tell me what she misinterpreted?" Something moved through Voss's face that wasn't guilt. Men like Voss didn't carry guilt the way ordinary people did. They'd found ways around it long ago, but something that recognized the weight of what was being named. "I'm going to leave this house," Garrett said, "with these ledgers. And you're going to let me because if you shoot me, Owen Marsh finds out why by morning, and whatever you've built here comes apart regardless. Owen Marsh works for this territory. This territory works for me. Owen Marsh works for his conscience. I'd know. I trained him." Garrett picked up his lamp, held the ledgers tighter under his arm. "And I've already had a conversation with him that you're going to find very inconvenient in about 6 hours. For the first time, Voss's smile fully disappeared. It happened slowly, the way light left a room at dusk. Not all at once, but degree by degree, until you looked around and realized the warmth was gone entirely. What was left on the man's face was just the face underneath, and it was exactly what Garrett had suspected it would be. Flat. Calculating. The face of someone running numbers. "You have copies," Voss said. "I have enough." "Enough isn't the same as copies." "You want to bet your operation on that?" A long silence. The lamp in Voss's hand threw shadows across the ceiling. The pistol stayed level, but Garrett watched the man's trigger finger, watched the specific tension in it, and it was the tension of someone deciding, not someone about to act. "Those girls will be returned to county custody," Voss said. "Whatever you think you've found, whatever story you take to Owen Marsh, I have the legal authority in this territory, and I will use it. You can't protect them indefinitely. Watch me." He walked to the window. He kept his pace even and his back straight, and he did not hurry, and he did not look back, because looking back would have told Voss something he didn't need to know, which was that Garrett's heart was hammering hard enough to feel in his teeth. Voss did not shoot. Garrett went out the window across the yard through the gate and into the dark. He walked 100 yards before he let himself breathe. He rode home fast, pushed the horse harder than he would have liked in the heat, and when his ranch came into view with the single lamp burning in the kitchen window, he felt something release in his chest that had been locked up since the moment Voss's office door had opened. Della heard him coming. She was on the porch before he'd tied the horse. Her arms crossed her hair down her bare feet on the worn boards. She looked at the ledgers under his arm and her jaw tightened. "You got them," she said. "I got them." He was there. It wasn't a question. She'd been sitting up in the dark for hours running every version of how this could go, and she'd run this one too. "He was there," Garrett said. "And you walked out anyway." "He let me walk out." Della stared at him. "Why would he let you walk out?" "Because shooting me creates more problems than letting me go." He came up the porch steps. He thinks he can still fix this through official channels, through paperwork and authority and the machinery he's built. He held up the ledgers. "He's wrong." She looked at the ledgers for a long moment. Her expression was complicated relief and fear, and something underneath both of them that she wasn't letting come fully to the surface. "Is it enough?" "What's in there?" "It's enough. Names, dates, payments. 8 years of it." He looked at her. "Your name's in there, Della. Yours and Pearl's. The Greer entry, the Henderson entry, what he paid them, and what they paid him." He held her gaze. "You're not a missing orphan in those books. You're a transaction. And that means every number that doesn't line up with the official county record is proof of fraud." Della's arms tightened across her chest. She looked at the dark yard, the empty road, the vast flat Texas night, pressing in from all directions. "He's going to fight this." "Yes." "He has more power than you." "He has more official power. That's not the same thing." "Garrett." She said his name quietly, the way she'd started saying it without the buffer of Mr. in front of it, just the word itself. "I need you to tell me honestly. Not to make me feel better. Honestly." She looked at him. "Can you win this?" He thought about Ellen. He thought about what she would have said. And he thought about Eli's face at the supper table. And he thought about Pearl's voice that morning, quiet as rainfall, saying mornin'. He thought about Della at 11 years old, mapping exits in the dark. "I don't know," he said. "But I know I'm not stopping, and I know you're not leaving, and I know Owen Marsh is at the courthouse at first light requesting records that are going to make Voss's morning very complicated." He looked at her straight. "That's what I know." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Okay." She pushed off the porch rail. "Come inside, you should eat something." He almost told her he wasn't hungry. Then he looked at her and understood that she'd been sitting up for hours in the dark, running every worst version of tonight, and feeding him was the thing she'd decided to do, with the relief of him coming back in one piece. And so he followed her inside and sat at the table and ate the plate she put in front of him, without argument. Owen arrived at the ranch before 7 the next morning. He rode in fast, tied his horse at the post, and came through the door with his hat in his hand, and his expression tight in the way it got when he was working to stay ahead of something. He looked at Garrett, looked at the ledgers on the table, and sat down. "I got into the courthouse records this morning," he said without preamble, 40 minutes before Voss arrived, to find out why I'd requested access. I had enough time. He pulled a folded sheaf of papers from his coat. The official county disbursements for orphan placements over the past 8 years. Every amount, every date, every family. He spread them on the table beside the ledgers. "Compare them." Garrett opened the first ledger, ran his finger down the column of private payments. Looked at Owen's papers. The discrepancies were immediate and significant. Where the official record showed $50 disbursed to the Henderson family, Voss's private ledger showed $120, the difference unaccounted for in any official document. Where the Greer placement showed a standard county fee, the private ledger showed an additional private payment from Edmund Greer to Voss, paid 6 weeks after placement, around the same time Della and Pearl had run. "He's been skimming county funds," Owen said, and taking private payments from the placement families on top of it. The families pay him extra for what amounts to guaranteed labor children, who are legally bound to stay in the placement with a judge who will classify any attempt to leave as a behavioral problem requiring return. His voice was very controlled. It's a closed system. He places the children, takes money from both sides, and uses his authority to ensure the product stays put. How many children? Garrett asked. In 8 years, over 60 placements. Not all of them were in situations like Pearl and Della's, but... Owen stopped. Enough were. Della was standing in the kitchen doorway. She'd come in from the storage room without either of them hearing her. Her face was still. Pearl was behind her, one hand on her sister's back, the way she always positioned herself when something was wrong. 60, Della said. At least, Owen said. He looked at her. I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment. The ones before us, the ones in the placements before we showed up, are they still there? Owen and Garrett looked at each other. Some of them probably, Owen said carefully. Della's jaw tightened. Then we need to move fast. Before Voss does something to make those children disappear into the system where nobody can find them. She looked at Garrett. Right? Right, Garrett said. What do we do? Owen leaned forward. I can send a telegram to the Territorial Marshal's office in Austin. If I send what I've got, the comparison between the official records and the private ledgers with a formal request for investigation, they're obligated to respond. Voss can't intercept a telegraph to Austin without someone noticing. He looked at Garrett. But it needs to go today, this morning, before he figures out what I pulled from the courthouse and gets ahead of it. Then go, Garrett said. There's a problem. Owen's voice was careful. Edna Pratt runs the telegraph office. The room was quiet for a moment. Of course she does, Della said flatly. I can't send it through her without it getting back to Voss within the hour. Owen turned his hat in his hands. There's a telegraph office in Millbrook, 20 miles east. If someone rides there... I'll go, Garrett said. Garrett, if Voss finds out you're... By the time he finds out, I'll already be there. He stood. Write what you need to write. I'll take it. Owen pulled out paper and wrote quickly, his handwriting tight and precise, 3 pages of documentation, with the specific discrepancies listed, and the dates and the names, and a formal request for immediate territorial investigation on grounds of fraud and criminal misuse of a minor's welfare. He signed it with his badge number and his full name, the signature of a man who understood exactly what he was putting his name to. He folded it, sealed it, handed it to Garrett. If they move on this, they'll send a marshal within the week, Owen said. Maybe faster if the discrepancies are as clear as I think they are. And in the meantime, don't let Voss get legal access to the girls. If he shows up with placement papers stall, tell him you need to consult a lawyer. Tell him anything. Owen stood. I'll be here. If he tries to move before Austin responds, he'll have to get through me first. Garrett looked at him. That's a considerable thing to say about a territorial judge. It's a considerable thing he's been doing to children. Owen's voice was flat and final. So. Garrett rode east. The Texas heat was already building by 8 in the morning, the sky turning that bleached white color that meant the day would be brutal. He rode hard and steady, not racing, but not letting the horse rest either, keeping to the road and his mind on what needed doing. He was 12 miles out when he heard the riders. He heard them before he saw them. 3 horses coming fast from the north, the sound carrying in the flat open land. He looked over his shoulder. 3 men. Moving to intercept, not traveling the same road, but cutting toward him at an angle that would bring them to his path about a quarter mile ahead. Voss's men. Had to be. Garrett calculated the distance to Millbrook. 8 miles. He couldn't outrun 3 horses over 8 miles without destroying his own. He looked at the road ahead, at the flat land on either side, at the cutoff he knew was coming up on the left, a ranch road unused leading toward the old Beaumont property that had been empty for 2 years. He took the cutoff. He heard them adjust behind him, heard the pace change, heard them split 1, staying on the main road to get ahead of him, 2 following. They knew this land as well as he did, maybe better. The first man cut across the scrub to his right and came in hard on his flank, pushing him left. Garrett let himself be pushed, waited, judged the distance, and then cut back right so fast the man's horse nearly collided with his. The man grabbed for him. Garrett's elbow connected with the man's jaw, and he stayed in the saddle, and the other man didn't. 1. The second came in from behind, and this one was smarter, not grabbing, going for the horse's reins instead. Garrett let him get close enough to reach, and then pulled up sharp. The man shot past him, overcorrected, went wide. Garrett turned his horse and rode straight at him, which was the last thing the man expected, and the horse shied away at the last second, and the rider went sideways. 2. The third man was waiting on the road ahead, just waiting, horse still, hand on his holster. Garrett slowed. They faced each other on the empty road, the heat bearing down, the sound of the other two behind him, one recovering, one not. "Voss wants the ledgers," the man said. "Voss wants a lot of things," Garrett said. "Doesn't mean he gets them." "You're one man." "I've heard that before." Garrett kept his eyes on the man's hand, the trigger finger, the same thing he'd watched last night. "I'll make you the same offer I made him. Step aside. Whatever he's paying you isn't worth what happens when the territorial marshal gets here." "Marshal's not here yet." "No, but I am." Garrett looked at him straight. "And I will ride through you if I have to. You need to decide if you're ready for that." The man stared at him. Garrett held still and let him look. Let him run his own calculation. Let him weigh the number Voss had promised against the thing he was seeing in front of him, a man who'd already put 2 of his people on the ground without a gun, who was sitting his horse like he'd been born on it, whose hands were entirely steady. The man pulled his horse to the side of the road. Garrett rode past him without looking back. He reached Millbrook at noon. He found the telegraph office, went in, and handed Owen's letter across the counter, with enough money to ensure it went immediately. He waited while the operator keyed it through, waited for the confirmation, and then he stood in the small office with the heat outside, pressing through the walls, and he thought about Della's voice on the porch last night. Can you win this? He had the ledgers. He had Owen's documentation. He had a telegraph on its way to Austin with a badge number behind it. He had fought off 3 of Voss's men on an empty road, and he was still standing. He didn't know if it was enough. He wouldn't know until Austin answered. He rode home. The ranch came into view in the late afternoon, the live oaks shadow long across the yard, the kitchen lamp already burning, even though the sun was still up. He saw the lamp, and he saw what it meant. Someone had lit it for him, knowing he'd be coming back tired, knowing that light in a window at the end of a long, hard day was its own kind of language. He was tying the horse when the front door opened. Pearl came out onto the porch. She stood at the top of the steps and looked at him. Her gray eyes steady, her dark hair in the braid Della had put it in that morning. She held on to the porch rail with one hand, and she watched him come across the yard, the way she watched everything carefully, completely missing nothing. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at her. "You're back," Pearl said. Not mornin', not the ghost of a word. A full sentence, clear and certain, delivered with the directness of a child who had decided something and was saying it. Garrett stood at the bottom of the steps, and for a moment he couldn't speak. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said finally. "I'm back." She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned and went inside. And from inside the house, he heard her voice saying something to Della, and he heard Della's quick response, and then Eli's voice joining in, and then the ordinary domestic sound of his kitchen. At the end of the day, plates being moved, chairs being pulled, his family sorting themselves around the table and making room. His family. He stood in the yard with the evening coming on, and the heat finally blessedly beginning to release its grip on the day, and he let that word settle into him all the way down to the place where he kept things he didn't have words for. Then he walked up the steps and through the door. Della looked up from the table when he came in. She looked at his face, read whatever was there, and nodded. Once the same small contained motion she used, instead of showing relief. "Telegrams sent," he said. "How long for an answer?" "Few days, maybe less if they move fast." She put plates on the table. And in the meantime, Garrett said, hanging his hat on the peg by the door, pulling out his chair, sitting down with his family around him, we eat supper. Della looked at him for a moment. Something in her face moved that she didn't entirely stop in time. Something young and unguarded that reminded him she was 12 years old and that 12-year-old girls, whatever they'd survived, were still 12 years old. Yeah, she said. Okay. She sat down. Pearl was already in her chair, her hands in her lap, watching Garrett with those steady gray eyes. Eli was talking about some problem with the water pump he'd noticed that afternoon, and his voice filled the kitchen, the way Eli's voice always filled whatever room he was in, warm and constant, and entirely at ease. Garrett looked around the table. He thought about Voss, about the marshal's office in Austin, about the 3 days that stood between now and whatever answer came back on that wire. He thought about all the ways this could still go wrong, because it could, and he wasn't a man who pretended otherwise. And then he let it go for the length of one meal, because this was what mattered, and this was what he was fighting for, and if he couldn't sit at this table and be present in it, then what exactly was the point of any of it? Pass the bread, he said. Eli passed it. Pearl reached for the water pitcher and poured a glass and pushed it toward Garrett without being asked. Della pretended she hadn't watched the whole exchange and went back to her plate. Outside, the Texas evening settled in hot and slow and wide. 3 days to Austin's answer. 3 days of Voss out there adjusting, recalculating, building whatever response he was going to build. 3 days. Garrett picked up his fork and thought then, that's what we have. 3 days, and everything we've already done, and each other. He looked at Pearl's hands around her water glass, at Della's jaw, at Eli's easy certainty that the world was going to be all right. It wasn't the worst position he'd ever been in. Not even close. The answer from Austin came on the second day. Garrett was at the forge when Owen rode in fast, his horse kicking up red dust across the yard, his face carrying the expression of a man who had news and hadn't decided yet whether it was good. He swung down before the horse had fully stopped and came across the yard with the telegram in his hand. Garrett set down his hammer. They're sending Marshal Calhoun, Owen said. He'll be here by tomorrow morning. He held out the telegram. They want Voss held on site pending investigation. They want the ledgers secured, and they want statements from the placement children. He paused. Both of them. Garrett took the telegram. Read it again. Calhoun's a good man. Best in the territory. He's the one who cleaned out the Rafter Creek land fraud 3 years ago. He doesn't stop until it's done. Owen looked toward the house. How are they? Holding. Garrett folded the telegram. Della's been watching the road every hour. She'll want to know about this. Yeah. He looked at the forge, at the work sitting half-finished on the anvil, and he thought about the fact that one more day stood between where they were and the moment Voss either ran or made his final move, and a man like Voss backed into a corner with his operation exposed was more dangerous than a man with open road ahead of him. Owen. He's going to try something before Calhoun arrives. Owen was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking the same thing. Can you stay the night? Already planned on it. Owen turned toward the house. I'll stable my horse. Garrett went inside. Della was at the kitchen table with Pearl. The two of them doing the letter work Garrett had started 3 days ago, Della practicing her writing, Pearl watching, and occasionally tracing the shapes with one careful finger. They both looked up when he came through the door, and Della read his face the way she always read it, completely and immediately, with the accuracy of someone who had spent years reading adults for signs of what was coming. Austin answered, she said. Marshal's coming tomorrow morning. Something moved through her face. Not relief, not yet relief, required more safety than one telegram could provide, but something adjacent to it. Something that said the ground under her feet had shifted slightly in the right direction. She looked at Pearl, who was looking at Garrett. Tomorrow, Pearl said. Tomorrow, Garrett confirmed. Pearl looked back down at the paper in front of her. She picked up the pencil Della had been using and drew a careful, deliberate line. Garrett watched her hand move and thought about 2 years of silence and the specific weight of words chosen by a child who'd decided they had to count. "The marshal will want to talk to you both," Garrett said, "when he gets here. He needs your statements about the Greers and the Hendersons and how Voss arranged the placements. Can you do that?" Della's jaw tightened. "Yes." "You don't have to say anything you're not ready to say." "I'm ready." She said it flat and certain, the way she said most things that cost her. "I've been ready. I've been waiting for someone who would actually listen." She looked at him directly. "That's what you found, isn't it? Someone who will listen." "That's what I found." She nodded once. "Then we'll talk." The day passed slow and tense, the way days passed when you were waiting for something you couldn't hurry. Owen stayed close to the ranch, visible his badge on his chest and his hand near his belt, which Garrett appreciated without saying so. Eli sensed the tension, the way children sensed most things, not through information, but through the quality of the air, and he stayed near the house near his sisters, doing small tasks with an attentiveness that was more adult than 10 years old had any right to be. Supper was quieter than usual, not unhappy, just careful. After the children were in bed, Garrett sat on the porch with Owen, and they didn't say much. The Texas night was thick, and still the heat still rising from the ground, even though the sun had been down for hours. Somewhere out past the fence line, a coyote called and went quiet. "You think he runs?" Owen asked. "No," Garrett said. "He spent 8 years building what he's got. Men like him don't run. They make one more play." "What kind of play?" "I don't know yet. That's what concerns me." They sat with that for a while. Garrett went to bed at midnight and was up again at 3, not from noise this time, not from Della moving through the house, but from a feeling at the back of his neck that had kept him alive through 14 years of deputy work, and that he had learned categorically not to ignore. He dressed in the dark, strapped on his gun belt, the one he'd taken down from the high shelf 3 days ago, and hung back in reach, and went to the window. The yard was still. He watched it for 5 minutes. Nothing moved. Then he saw it. Not movement exactly. The absence of something that should have been there, the shape of his horse in the near corral, visible every night against the fence rail, was gone. He was out the back door before the thought had finished forming. The corral gate was open, not broken. Opened deliberately, the latch lifted and left up. His horse was gone. Owen's horse was gone. Both animals taken clean and quiet by someone who knew what they were doing. Cut off the transport. Make sure he couldn't ride for help and couldn't ride to meet Calhoun on the road. Garrett went back inside, moving fast and quiet. He woke Owen with a hand on the shoulder. Owen was up and standing in one motion, hand on his gun. Garrett held up 2 fingers, the horse's, and Owen's face went tight and comprehending. Then they heard the wagon. It came from the road, rolling slow and deliberate. No attempt at stealth now, the way things moved when someone wanted you to know they were coming. Garrett went to the front window. 3 men on horseback flanking a wagon, and in the wagon seat, upright and unhurried, as though he were arriving for a civic meeting, Judge Harlan Voss. And beside him, holding a lantern, Edna Pratt. Garrett stared at that for a moment. He hadn't seen that piece of it coming. He should have. "Stay inside," he said to Owen. Then louder toward the storage room. "Della, stay in your room. Lock the door." A pause. Then Della's voice, tight and controlled. "What's happening?" "Voss is here. Owen and I will handle it. You stay with Pearl." A longer pause. "All right." He went out onto the porch. Voss climbed down from the wagon with the careful movements of a heavy man managing a step, and he straightened up and looked at Garrett on the porch with that smile that Garrett had stopped believing in approximately 30 seconds after he'd first seen it. "Mr. Cole." He held up a folded document. "I have a court order, signed this evening by Judge Alderman in the next county, authorizing the immediate return of the 2 minor girls currently residing unlawfully on this property to county custody." He held it out. "I'd appreciate your cooperation." Garrett didn't move from the porch. "Alderman signed that tonight." He did. In the middle of the night. The welfare of children doesn't keep business hours. No, Garrett said. But judges do. How much did it cost you to get Alderman out of bed and get his signature on something without reading it? Voss's smile held. You're making serious allegations, Mr. Cole. I'd be careful. I'm done being careful. Garrett looked at the three men on horseback. Same men from the road, or the same type. He glanced at Edna Pratt on the wagon seat, who was looking straight ahead with the rigid posture of someone who had committed to a course of action and was not going to let herself think about it. Mrs. Pratt, you didn't send that telegram to Austin, did you? She didn't answer. You held it, Garrett said. Voss found out what Owen sent, and you held it on his behalf. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, stiff and thin and directed at the middle distance. Then why are you here at 3 a.m. with a court order? No answer. The telegram went through, Owen said from the doorway behind Garrett. His voice was steady. I sent a duplicate, rider not wire. Left the same morning. Marshal Calhoun is coming, whether you held that wire or not. Voss's smile disappeared for the second time in 3 days. This time it didn't come back. Give me the girls, he said. And the warmth and reasonableness were entirely gone from his voice, and what was underneath was exactly what Garrett had known was there all along. Hard, transactional, the voice of a man who had run out of the version of himself that worked in polite company. I have a signed order. You are legally obligated. You don't have anything that's going to hold past tomorrow morning, Garrett said. And you know it. Calhoun's coming. The ledgers are documented, compared against the official county records, and in the hands of someone you can't reach. He looked at Voss across the yard. It's over. Whatever you thought you could do tonight, it's over. The only question is whether you make it worse. The children are county property under my jurisdiction. They are not property. The words came out of Garrett with a force he hadn't planned and couldn't have stopped. They are not property. They are not transactions. They are not line items in your ledger, and they are not going anywhere with you. Not tonight. Not ever. His voice had dropped, which was worse than if it had risen. I want you off my land. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his three men, and Garrett watched him run the calculation. Watched the numbers turn over in those pale eyes. 3 riders against a deputy with a badge and a former deputy who'd already put 2 of his men on the ground with a marshal arriving by morning, and a documented case that couldn't be made to disappear. One of the riders shifted in his saddle, just slightly, the smallest adjustment of a man reconsidering whether he wanted to be here. It was enough. Voss looked at Garrett one final time. His face had gone to something Garrett had never seen on it before. Not anger, not calculation, but something older. The look of a man who knew he'd run out of moves and was working out how to carry that. This isn't finished, Voss said. Yes, it is, Garrett said. You just don't know it yet. Voss climbed back onto the wagon. He sat upright, arranged his coat, and turned the wagon on the road without another word. His riders fell in behind him. Edna Pratt sat rigid and silent as the wagon moved away down the road, the lantern she was holding swinging slightly with the motion, throwing unsteady light across the ground. Garrett stood on the porch and watched until the light was gone, and the sound of the wheels faded out, and the night went back to its ordinary noises, crickets and wind, and the distant movement of what might have been his horses finding their own way back now that no one was holding them. Owen let out a breath beside him. That's the second time you've walked him back. Third time's what the marshal's for. Owen almost laughed. Yeah. The storage room door opened behind them. Della came through the kitchen and out onto the porch. Pearl a half step behind her, one hand holding her sister's sleeve. Della looked at the empty road, at the settling dust, at the dark where the wagon had been. He's gone, she asked. For tonight. And tomorrow. Tomorrow the marshal comes, and it stops being tonight's problem. Garrett turned to look at her. You all right? Della's chin came up. She was doing the thing she always did, taking inventory of herself, checking what was steady and what wasn't, presenting only the steady parts. But she'd been standing in the kitchen doorway long enough to hear most of it, and he could see in her face the weight of the specific words he'd said that she hadn't expected. They are not property. He could see her working out what it meant that someone had said that out loud in the middle of the night to a man with a court order and 3 riders. "Yeah," she said. "I'm all right." Pearl's hand moved from Della's sleeve to Della's hand. She laced her fingers through her sister's without looking up the automatic connection of 2 people who had been each other's entire world for 2 years, who had crossed 200 miles of Texas summer on the strength of that single, unbreakable thing. Garrett looked at them both. "Go back to bed, both of you. I need you rested when Calhoun gets here." Della looked at him for a moment, that measuring look, and then she nodded and turned Pearl back toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. "Garrett." She didn't turn around. "Yeah." "What you said." A pause. "About not being property." Another pause longer. "Nobody's ever said that before, not like they meant it." The words sat in the air between them. "I meant it," he said. She went inside. Marshal Calhoun arrived before 9 the next morning. A lean, weathered man with a gray mustache and eyes that had the specific quality of someone who had spent 30 years looking at situations clearly and without sentiment. He shook Garrett's hand, shook Owen's hand, sat at the kitchen table, and spent 45 minutes going through the ledgers and Owen's comparison documents without speaking. When he looked up, his expression was not surprised. It was the expression of someone who had suspected something for a long time and was now looking at confirmation. "How long have you known about Voss?" Garrett asked. "Had reports going back 2 years. Nothing documented enough to move on." Calhoun looked at the ledgers. "This is documented enough." He looked toward the storage room door. "The girls." "I'll get them." Della came out first. Pearl behind her. Both of them dressed, both of them with their shoulders squared and their chins up, presenting themselves to the room the way soldiers presented to a commanding officer, ready composed, whatever was underneath it, locked down tight. They sat across from Calhoun at the kitchen table, and Eli stood in the kitchen doorway, and Owen stood by the wall, and Garrett pulled his chair around to sit beside the girls without making a decision about it, simply finding himself there. Calhoun looked at Della. "I need you to tell me what happened, from the beginning. Take your time." Della looked at Garrett once. Brief. Then she looked at Calhoun, and she began to talk. She talked for a long time. She talked about the Greers and the Hendersons, and Voss's visits to both properties, and what she had seen and heard and experienced. She talked in the same flat, factual voice she used when she was getting through something by making it data instead of memory. But twice she had to stop and press her lips together and wait, and both times Pearl's hand found hers under the table, and both times she continued. When she finished, Calhoun was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Pearl. "You don't have to say anything," he said. His voice had shifted. Quieter. "Whatever your sister said covers the record. You don't have to say a word if you don't want to." Pearl looked at him, those gray eyes clear and still. She looked at Della. She looked at Garrett. Then she looked back at Calhoun. "It's true," she said. "Everything Della said. It's true." 5 words. Clear as creek water. Delivered with the absolute authority of a child who had been silent for 2 years and had chosen this moment to end it. Calhoun nodded. He wrote it down. He closed his notebook, stood, and looked at Garrett. "I'll have Voss in custody before noon. The Greer and Henderson properties will be investigated. Any children currently in those placements will be removed pending review." He picked up his hat. "Your documentation combined with Miss Della's testimony is sufficient for arrest and trial. He won't be practicing law in this territory again." Garrett walked him to the door. On the porch, Calhoun paused. "Those girls," he said quietly. "What are your intentions?" Garrett looked at him. "To keep them. Formally. However it needs to be done formally, that's how we'll do it." Calhoun studied him for a moment with those clear assessing eyes. Then he nodded once. "I'll have the paperwork sent from Austin within the month. Legal guardianship. Given the circumstances, it shouldn't take long." He settled his hat. "You did good work here, Cole. Could use men like you. I've got a ranch, Garrett said. And a family. Calhoun almost smiled. I can see that. He rode out. Garrett stood on the porch and watched the marshal go, and then he stood there a little longer with the Texas morning pressing down on him, and the heat already building, and the sound of his family behind him in the kitchen. Eli's voice, Pearl's lighter sound, Della saying something sharp and Eli laughing at it. He took the ring off his finger. He hadn't planned to do it. His hand simply moved his thumb, finding the band the way it had found it every day for 4 years, running along the inside edge, and this time instead of stopping, he worked it over his knuckle and held it in his palm. He looked at it. Ellen. 2 years into the ground, and still the first thing he thought about in the morning, and the last thing he thought about at night. Ellen, who had planted the live oak and made the kitchen warm, and given him Eli, and given him 12 years of understanding what it meant to have someone beside you who chose you every day. He closed his fingers around the ring. Then he walked to the live oak at the edge of the porch, her tree, the one she'd put in the ground the year they arrived, and he worked a small hollow in the dirt at its base with his boot heel, and he set the ring in the hollow, and he covered it over. Not gone, not forgotten, just resting in the right place at the root of the thing she'd planted that was still alive and still growing. He straightened up and turned around. Della was standing in the doorway. She'd seen. She didn't say anything. She looked at his hand, at the bare finger, at his face, and she did the reading. She always did the careful, complete reading, and whatever she found there, she accepted without comment. Eli wants to know if we can go to the creek this afternoon, she said. He says there's a swimming hole. There is. Pearl wants to go. A pause. I want to go. Garrett looked at his daughter. 12 years old, calloused feet and guarded eyes, and a love for her sister that was the fiercest and most uncomplicated thing he had ever seen. 12 years old, and she had walked 200 miles and told her story to a marshal and held herself together through all of it, and now she wanted to go to the swimming hole. Then we go, he said. She almost smiled. Yeah. She went back inside, and he heard her telling Pearl. And he heard Pearl's sound, not quite a word. Something between a word and a laugh. The sound of a child who was remembering how to be a child. And he heard Eli whoop from somewhere upstairs, and the quick thunder of his feet on the stairs. Garrett stood on the porch in the Texas morning and let it all wash over him. The heat and the dust and the sound of his children inside his house. The ring in the ground under Ellen's tree. Calhoun riding toward Voss with the full authority of the territorial law at his back. The ledgers that had named 60 children and would now be used to free them. He thought about what Della had said the night he'd come back from Millbrook. 3 days is something. He thought about Pearl's voice that same morning, steady and certain you're back. He thought about the girl who'd stood in Clay Holt's market stall, with her sister's wrist in her hand, mapping exits, measuring the cost of trust, calculating whether one more risk was worth taking. It was. It always had been. Whatever came next, the legal papers, the questions, the slow and imperfect work of building something out of what they'd each survived, they would face it the way they'd faced everything. Since the moment he'd put his coins on that counter and said, "Keep it, it's paid for." Together, and without stopping, and without pretending the hard parts weren't hard. But the hard part was done now. What was left was the rest of it. The ordinary days, and the difficult ones, and the slow accumulation of small moments that added up over time to a life. Supper at a table that had room for all of them. Eli's voice filling whatever room he was in. Pearl's gray eyes finding his face across the kitchen in the morning and deciding he was safe. Della's chin going up and her shoulders going back and her hard-won, rarely given, absolutely genuine trust. His. All of it. His. Garrett Cole put on his hat, turned toward the door, and went inside to his family. They were still there. They were always going to be there. And that was not a small thing, and it was not a temporary thing, and it was not something he was ever going to take for granted again. It was everything. It was enough. It was home.